The rain in the Silver Moon territory didn't fall, it punished. It lashed against the stained glass windows of the great hall, mirroring the cold, jagged shards of the heart Elena Gilbert held in her chest. Tonight was supposed to be the night of her binding, the moment her soul tie to the future Alpha was cemented before the gods. Instead, it was a public execution of her dignity. The title of her life's new bitter chapter was written in the sneer of the man she loved. After her mate abandoned her for his wealthy lover, she got married to a stranger, unaware he is the Duke. Before we go any deeper into this storm of betrayal and secrets, I want to say a truly heartfelt hello to all of you. It's so wonderful to have you back here with me. I'm curious, where are you watching from today? Are you tucked away in a rainy city or somewhere under the sun? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. And if you're new here or if you've been following along but haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider joining our family. We tell stories of the heart for the heart, and I'd love to have you with us for every twist and turn. Elena stood at the altar, her white lace veil clinging to her skin like a spiderweb. Across from her, Tyler Lockwood, her destined mate, the man she had grown up with, wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Lydia Martin, the daughter of the Iron Coast tycoon, whose silk dress cost more than Elena's entire village. I, Tyler Lockwood, formally reject the bond, he declared, his voice echoing with a cold metallic finality that made the elders gasp. A leader needs a partner with resources, not a girl with nothing but a lineage of dust. Lydia is my choice. She is my future. The rejection hit Elena like a physical blow to the solar plexus. In a society where the mate bond was the ultimate measure of worth, she had just been declared worthless in front of every powerful family in the land. The whispers started instantly, sharp, biting, and cruel. Discarded. Broken. Second best. Elena didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a bone-deep freeze. She looked at her father, whose head was bowed in shame, and then at the mocking smirk on Lydia's face. She realized then that if she stayed here, she would wither away in the shadow of their wealthy union. She needed to vanish. She needed a shield. Is there any man here? Elena's voice rang out, trembling but clear, cutting through the murmurs. Who seeks a wife? Any man who will take me away from this place tonight, legally and bound, no questions asked. The hall went silent. Tyler laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. Who would want the Alpha's leftovers, Elena? Don't make a fool of yourself. But then from the very back of the hall, where the shadows were longest and the firelight didn't reach, a man stood up. He was tall, dressed in a plain charcoal gray traveling cloak that hid his frame. He didn't wear jewels. He didn't carry a crest. He looked like a traveler, a quiet stranger who had simply sought shelter from the rain. I will, the stranger said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate the very floorboards. He walked forward with a steady, unhurried gait. As he stepped into the light, Elena saw a face that was strikingly handsome but etched with a profound, watchful stillness. His eyes were a deep, stormy gray, looking at her not with pity, but with a strange, piercing recognition. I am Stefan Salvatore, he said, offering a gloved hand. I am a man of quiet means and a distant home. If you seek a fresh start, I offer you my name and my protection. But I can promise you nothing but a cold arrangement and a life away from these borders. I accept, Elena whispered, placing her hand in his. Her skin tingled where they touched, not the frantic heat of a mate bond but a steady, grounding warmth. Tyler's face contorted with a mixture of shock and sudden, inexplicable rage. You're marrying a drifter? A nobody? Stefan didn't even look at Tyler. He kept his gaze on Elena. The carriage is waiting. Shall we? As they walked out of the hall, leaving the whispers and the disgrace behind, Elena felt the first breath of true freedom. She thought she was marrying a ghost to escape a monster. She had no way of knowing that the quiet stranger leading her into the night was the Duke of Castlerobs, a man whose shadow governed the very laws Tyler swore by. The question wasn't just whether she could survive the marriage. It was what would happen when the man who threw her away realized he hadn't just lost a mate, but had insulted the wife of the most powerful man in the kingdom. The carriage ride away from the Silver Moon territory was a symphony of rhythmic rain and suffocating silence. Inside the plush, velvet-lined interior, far more luxurious than any drifter should afford, Elena Gilbert sat huddled against the door, her white lace veil now torn and damp. Her deepest desire was no longer for love. It was for the erasure of the last 3 hours. In the eyes of her people she was a null, a wolf whose mate had found a better soul. The psychological weight of Tyler's rejection wasn't just about a broken heart. It was the loss of her identity. She had spent her life preparing to be an alpha's mate, a healer and a pillar of the community. Now she was a woman whose only worth lay in the shadow of a stranger. Her fear was a cold, creeping thing. She feared that Stefan Salvatore would eventually see her the way Tyler did, as a burden, a girl whose spirit had been hollowed out. Stefan sat across from her, his posture perfect, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He watched her with a clinical yet not unkind intensity. Stefan was a man defined by a monumental secret. As the Duke of Castlerobs, his life was a chessboard of high-stakes politics and ancient bloodlines. He had spent years avoiding the season and the desperate noblewomen who sought his title, disgusted by the transactional nature of his world. When he had stood up in that hall, it wasn't just out of pity. He saw in Elena a raw, untainted honesty, a woman who would rather marry a ghost than compromise her dignity. "You're shaking," Stefan said, his voice cutting through the gloom. He didn't move to touch her, respecting the invisible wall she had built around herself. "The heater is under the seat. Use it." "I'm fine," Elena lied, her teeth chattering. I didn't even ask where we are going." "To the Northern Highlands," Stefan replied. "My estate is secluded. You will have your own wing, your own staff, and total freedom. In exchange, I only ask for your presence at dinner and your discretion regarding my business." "And if Tyler comes looking for me?" Elena asked, the shadow of her former mate still looming large. Stefan's eyes darkened, a flash of something ancient and lethal flickering in the gray depths. "Tyler Lockwood no longer has a claim to you. By the laws of the Highlands you are mine. Let him come. He will find the border much less welcoming than he expects." The supporting characters in their new life began to emerge as they crossed the Highland Bridge. Alaric Saltzman, Stefan's head of household and a man who looked like he'd seen a dozen wars, met them at the gates. His eyes widened when he saw Elena, but a sharp, subtle nod from Stefan silenced any questions. Then there was Caroline Forbes, a vibrant, sharp-witted blonde who served as the estate's lead housekeeper. She looked at Elena's tattered wedding dress with a mixture of horror and immediate, fierce empathy. "She'll need the rosewater bath and the silk shift, Caroline," Stefan commanded as they stepped into the grand foyer of the estate. Elena looked around the entrance hall, the soaring arches, the ancient tapestries, and the sheer scale of the stone walls. It was a fortress, not a home. She felt small, a sparrow trapped in a cathedral. "Mr. Salvatore," she whispered, turning to him. "Why did you really do it? There were 100 women in that hall who would have brought you dowries and alliances." Stefan stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. For the first time he reached out, his gloved thumb brushing a stray wet hair from her forehead. "The women in that hall were looking for a title, Elena. You were just looking for a way to breathe. I find I prefer the latter." He turned to leave, his cloak swirling behind him, leaving Elena with more questions than answers. He was safe, yes. He was married, technically. But as she followed Caroline up the winding stone stairs, she realized that while Tyler had shattered her world, Stefan Salvatore was a mystery that might just consume her entire soul. The carriage ride away from the Silvermoon territory was a symphony of rhythmic rain and suffocating silence. Inside the plush, velvet-lined interior, far more luxurious than any drifter should afford, Elena Gilbert sat huddled against the door, her white lace veil now torn and damp. Her deepest desire was no longer for love. It was for the erasure of the last 3 hours. In the eyes of her people she was a null, a wolf whose mate had found a better soul. The psychological weight of Tyler's rejection wasn't just about a broken heart. It was the loss of her identity. She had spent her life preparing to be an alpha's mate, a healer and a pillar of the community. Now she was a woman whose only worth lay in the shadow of a stranger. Her fear was a cold, creeping thing. She feared that Stefan Salvatore would eventually see her the way Tyler did, as a burden, a girl whose spirit had been hollowed out. Stefan sat across from her, his posture perfect, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He watched her with a clinical yet not unkind intensity. Stefan was a man defined by a monumental secret. As the Duke of Castlerobs, his life was a chessboard of high-stakes politics and ancient bloodlines. He had spent years avoiding the season, and the desperate noblewomen who sought his title, disgusted by the transactional nature of his world. When he had stood up in that hall, it wasn't just out of pity. He saw in Elena a raw, untainted honesty, a woman who would rather marry a ghost than compromise her dignity. "You're shaking," Stefan said, his voice cutting through the gloom. He didn't move to touch her, respecting the invisible wall she had built around herself. "The heater is under the seat. Use it." "I'm fine," Elena lied, her teeth chattering. I didn't even ask where we are going." "To the Northern Highlands," Stefan replied. "My estate is secluded. You will have your own wing, your own staff, and total freedom. In exchange, I only ask for your presence at dinner and your discretion regarding my business." "And if Tyler comes looking for me?" Elena asked, the shadow of her former mate still looming large. Stefan's eyes darkened, a flash of something ancient and lethal flickering in the gray depths. "Tyler Lockwood no longer has a claim to you. By the laws of the Highlands, you are mine. Let him come. He will find the border much less welcoming than he expects." The supporting characters in their new life began to emerge as they crossed the Highland Bridge. Alaric Saltzman, Stefan's head of household and a man who looked like he'd seen a dozen wars, met them at the gates. His eyes widened when he saw Elena, but a sharp, subtle nod from Stefan silenced any questions. Then there was Caroline Forbes, a vibrant, sharp-witted blonde who served as the estate's lead housekeeper. She looked at Elena's tattered wedding dress with a mixture of horror and immediate, fierce empathy. "She'll need the rosewater bath and the silk shift, Caroline," Stefan commanded as they stepped into the grand foyer of the estate. Elena looked around the entrance hall, the soaring arches, the ancient tapestries, and the sheer scale of the stone walls. It was a fortress, not a home. She felt small, a sparrow trapped in a cathedral. "Mr. Salvatore," she whispered, turning to him. "Why did you really do it? There were 100 women in that hall who would have brought you dowries and alliances." Stefan stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. For the first time he reached out, his gloved thumb brushing a stray wet hair from her forehead. "The women in that hall were looking for a title, Elena. You were just looking for a way to breathe. I find I prefer the latter." He turned to leave, his cloak swirling behind him, leaving Elena with more questions than answers. He was safe, yes. He was married, technically. But as she followed Caroline up the winding stone stairs, she realized that while Tyler had shattered her world, Stefan Salvatore was a mystery that might just consume her entire soul. The revelation that her quiet stranger was the most powerful duke in the Highlands, and that he had been watching her for years, didn't bring Elena peace. Instead, it built a wall of glass between them. She felt like a bird that had escaped a cage only to realize it had been flown into a gilded aviary. "You've been waiting for me?" Elena asked, her voice echoing in the vast, cold foyer. "What does that mean, Stefan? Were you waiting for me to be broken? For Tyler to humiliate me so I'd have nowhere else to go?" Stefan's jaw tightened, the regal composure he'd shown to Tyler flickering. "I was waiting for you to be free of a man who didn't deserve you. I would have stepped in years ago, but the laws of the mate bond are sacred. I couldn't interfere until he severed it himself." He reached out to her, but Elena took a sharp step back. The rising tension wasn't just about his title. It was about the power imbalance. "I thought I was marrying an equal in misery. But you're a duke. Everything in this house, even the air I breathe, belongs to you. How can I ever know if this affection you claim is real, or just another acquisition for your collection?" The following weeks were a delicate dance of distance and magnetic pull. Stefan tried to bridge the gap with quiet gestures. He didn't shower her with jewels. Instead, he filled the library with the rare herbology texts she loved. He ensured her favorite tea was always waiting by the fire. He stayed close enough to be a presence, but far enough to let her heal. Meanwhile, the romantic subplot deepened during the long Highland evenings. One night, a fierce mountain blizzard trapped them in the small drawing room. The power flickered, leaving them in the amber glow of the hearth. "Tell me something true, Stefan," Elena said, watching the flames. "Not something a duke would say. Something the man in the charcoal cloak would say." Stefan sat on the floor near her chair, a rare moment of informality. "I hate the opera," he admitted, a small smile tugging at his lips. I find the politics of the court exhausting. And the first time I saw you at the Harvest Festival 3 years ago, you were helping a stray dog with a broken paw. You looked so fiercely protective that I realized I had spent my whole life being a duke, but I'd forgotten how to be a person. I didn't want to acquire you, Elena. I wanted to remember how to feel. The vulnerability in his voice made Elena's heart ache. She reached out, her fingers grazing his hand. This time she didn't pull away. The attraction was a slow burn, a steady heat that began to thaw the ice Tyler had left behind. But as their bond grew, so did the external pressure. Lydia Martin wasn't a woman who took defeat lightly. She began planting false clues in the local social papers, hinting that Elena had seduced the Duke while still bound to Tyler, trying to paint Elena as a social pariah to force the High Council to annul the marriage. Even within the house, obstacles appeared. Elijah Michelson, the Duke's stern legal advisor, constantly reminded Stefan that marrying a discarded mate, without a proper dowry or political alliance, was putting his dukedom at risk. The council is restless, Stefan, Elijah warned in a hushed conversation Elena overheard. They see this as a weakness. If you don't produce a legitimate heir or a massive alliance soon, they will challenge your right to the Highland throne. Elena realized then that being the Duchess of Castle Robs wasn't a fairy tale. It was a battlefield. Every meaningful interaction with Stefan was shadowed by the threat of his world rejecting her. The frustration of wanting to love him but fearing the consequences of her worthless status pushed her to the edge. I'm going to make them see, Elena whispered to herself one night, looking at the herbology notes she'd been working on, a potential cure for the blight affecting the Highland crops. I won't be the reason he loses everything. But as she worked to prove her worth, a red herring emerged. She found a hidden portrait in Stefan's private study, a woman who looked strikingly like her wearing the Duke's family crest. The seed of doubt was planted. Was Stefan in love with her, or was he in love with a ghost from his past? The winter gala at Castle Robs was meant to be Elena's official introduction to the High Council, a night of strategic glamour designed to silence the whispers. But as Elena stood before the gilded mirror in her chambers, the image of the woman in the hidden portrait burned in the back of her mind. She wore the Castle Robs rubies, but they felt like cold weights against her skin. You look like a dream, Stefan whispered, entering the room. He reached out to clasp a diamond bracelet around her wrist, but Elena stiffened. I found the portrait, Stefan, she said, her voice trembling. The woman who looks exactly like me. Is that why I'm here? Am I just a replacement for a memory? Stefan's hand dropped. The air in the room grew heavy, the passion that had been building between them suddenly choked by a thick layer of grief. That was Catherine, he said, his voice a low, pained rasp. My brother's betrothed. She died years ago. I thought I was over the resemblance, Elena, but when I saw you at the festival, I realized it wasn't the face I was drawn to. It was the spirit that she never had. Before they could delve deeper into the wound, Alaric burst into the room, his face pale. The council has arrived, Your Grace. But they aren't alone. Tyler Lockwood and Lydia Martin are with them. They've brought a claim of primordial theft. The ballroom was a sea of judgmental eyes as Stefan and Elena descended the stairs. Tyler stood at the center of the hall, clutching an ancient yellowed scroll. The Duke claims his marriage is legal, Tyler shouted, his voice echoing with a desperate, ugly triumph. But according to the Highland Charter of 1704, a duke cannot marry a woman whose mate bond was severed under false pretense. I didn't reject Elena because I wanted Lydia. I rejected her because I was under the influence of a mind-altering tincture, provided by the duke's own physician. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. The revelation shifted the entire direction of the story. If Stefan had orchestrated the rejection to free Elena, the marriage wasn't just a scandal, it was a crime against the high laws. Elena looked at Stefan, her heart shattering. Did you have him drugged? Stefan didn't look at Tyler. He looked only at Elena, his expression a mixture of betrayal and cold determination. I would never steal your choice, Elena. Never. Then explain this. Lydia Martin stepped forward, holding up a ledger. Your physician's own records. Monthly payments from the Castle Robs treasury for specialized alchemy, delivered to the Silver Moon territory. The stakes were raised to their highest point yet. The High Council's elder, a man with eyes like frozen granite, stepped forward. Until the source of this tincture is verified, the Duke's title is suspended, and the Duchess is to be placed in the custody of the High Court. Stefan Salvatore, you are charged with high treason against the bond. As the guards moved in, the romantic connection they had built was tested by a devastating blow of doubt. Elena felt the floor vanish beneath her. Was the man who chose her when no one else did actually the man who had destroyed her life to get what he wanted? I didn't do it, Elena, Stefan said as they were pulled apart, his voice desperate. Trust what you feel, not what they show you. But as Elena was led away toward the carriage that would take her to the High Court's prison, she saw Tyler and Lydia sharing a look of predatory success. The midpoint revelation hadn't just shifted the story, it had turned her sanctuary into a trap. The iron gates of the High Court's northern tower didn't just close. They rang with a finality that signaled the death of hope. Elena was stripped of her velvet cloak and the castle rob's rubies, replaced by a shift of coarse, unbleached linen. The stone walls of her cell were weeping with dampness, and the only sound was the rhythmic drip of water and the distant mocking howl of the highland wind. For the first time since the night of her rejection, Elena felt the full weight of her isolation. The cold arrangement had become a frozen tomb. He lied to me, she whispered into the dark, her voice cracking. The image of the ledger, the payments from Stefan's treasury to her home territory, played on a loop in her mind. Every tender moment they had shared, every soft word by the hearth, now felt like a calculated move in a long-game conquest. She felt a profound despair, a hollow ache that was worse than Tyler's betrayal because she had actually begun to trust Stefan. She had begun to love the man who had seemingly bought her soul. Back at the estate, Stefan was a prisoner in his own home. Stripped of his ducal authority, he was confined to the West Wing, guarded by the very council soldiers he used to command. He paced the floor like a caged predator, his ribs aching from the phantom weight of the crown he no longer wore. They've moved her to the Blackwood Tower, Stefan, Alaric said, slipping into the room through a servant's passage. The council is preparing to annul the marriage by dawn. Tyler has already signed the papers to reclaim his mate. He's claiming the tincture rendered him legally insane, and the bond was never truly broken. I never authorized those payments, Alaric, Stefan roared, slamming his fist into the mahogany desk. Find the physician. If he's still alive, he's the only one who can prove the ledger is a forgery. The physician is gone, Stefan. Vanished the night of the gala, Alaric replied, his voice heavy. And there's more. Lydia Martin has taken over your mother's suites. She's acting as if she already owns the Highlands. The separation was absolute. Elena was told that Stefan had already signed a confession to save his own life, trading her back to Tyler for a reduced sentence of exile. It was a lie, a jagged piece of psychological warfare designed to break her spirit, but in the silence of the tower, it sounded like the truth. The darkest hour hit when Tyler Lockwood appeared at her cell door. He wasn't the arrogant alpha-to-be anymore. He was a man fueled by a dark, obsessive entitlement. The Duke is done, Elena, Tyler sneered, pressing his face against the bars. The council has stripped him of everything. You're coming back to Silvermoon with me. We'll tell the world you were kidnapped, that the Duke used alchemy to cloud your mind. We'll be the most powerful couple in the territories, just like we planned. I would rather die in this cell than go back to a man who threw me away for a dowry, Elena spat, her eyes flashing with a spark of her old fire. Then you'll die, Tyler whispered, his face twisting. Because tomorrow the council executes the thief of bonds. And you'll watch Stefan Salvatore hang from the very bridge you crossed to get here. The situation appeared utterly hopeless. Stefan was powerless, Elena was caged, and the truth was buried under a mountain of forged ledgers and bought silences. As the moon reached its zenith, Elena collapsed onto the straw pallet, her deepest fears realized. She was a pawn in a game played by giants, and the man who had chosen her was going to pay for it with his life. The transition from despair to defiance didn't come from a sword or a crown, but from the very thing the council had overlooked, Elena's own mind. As she sat in the damp darkness of the Blackwood Tower, her fingers brushed against the lining of her coarse shift. He felt a sharp, thin prick. She had hidden a small vial of concentrated lumina root and a silver sewing needle in her hem before the gala, a habit born from years of being a healer who never knew when a crisis would strike. In the silence of the cell, she realized the key to solving the conflict wasn't just proving Stefan's innocence. It was proving the tincture's true origin. The physician didn't work for Stefan, she whispered, her eyes widening as she recalled a tiny detail from the ledger. The ink used for the specialized alchemy entries had a faint, metallic sheen, the mark of the Iron Coast mines owned by Lydia Martin's family. Suddenly, the heavy iron door of the cell groaned. Elena stood, bracing herself for Tyler, but the figure that stepped into the moonlight wasn't her former mate. It was Alaric Saltzman, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead, holding a set of rusted keys. "The Duke sends his regards," Alaric rasped. "And he's currently occupying the guards at the main gate. We have 4 minutes before the perimeter is sealed." "Where is he?" Elena demanded, grabbing her hidden vial. "He's fighting his way to the bridge," Alaric said, leading her through the winding, lightless passages of the tower. He made a realization, Elena. He found the physician. Or rather, he found where Lydia was hiding him. They emerged into the freezing Highland night just as a signal flare erupted over the bridge. The sight that met Elena's eyes was one of pure, raw courage. Stefan was there, his fine clothes torn, standing alone against a dozen council guards. He wasn't fighting like a duke. He was fighting like a man who had everything to lose and only one person left to save. "Stefan!" Elena screamed, rushing toward the bridge. The guards hesitated as she approached, but it was the arrival of the High Council elders, led by a fuming Tyler, that brought the confrontation to a head. "Kill them both," Tyler ordered, his voice cracking with desperation. "They're trying to flee the jurisdiction." "Wait." Elena's voice cut through the wind like a bell. She held up the vial of lumina root. "You want to talk about tinctures? This is the reagent for the Iron Coast alchemy. It reacts only to the presence of silver moon water." She stepped toward the elder, her hand steady. "If Tyler was drugged by the Duke, his blood will remain clear. But if he was drugged by Lydia Martin's family to force this rejection and seize the Highland throne, his blood will turn as black as his heart the moment this root touches it." The elder looked at Tyler, then at Stefan, who stood protective and bloodied beside Elena. "Test it," the elder commanded. The fear in Tyler's eyes was the only confession the room needed. He tried to bolt, but Stefan was faster, pinning him against the stone railing of the bridge with a strength born of months of suppressed love and fury. The turning point was absolute. In that moment, the romantic interests didn't just reunite. They became a singular force. Elena saw the man Stefan truly was, a man who would bleed for her truth, and Stefan saw the woman he had always known she was, a healer who could dismantle a lie with a single drop of insight. "The key isn't the ledger," Stefan growled, his gaze locked on the council. "The key is the betrayal of the bond itself. And the only people who betrayed it are the ones standing on that side of the bridge." Hope didn't just spark. It roared into a flame. The truth was out. The villains were exposed, and for the first time the Duke and his Duchess were standing on the same side of the war. The spring thaw had finally come to the Highlands, and with it, a transformation that no one in the territories could have predicted. The mist that used to shroud the Castlerob's estate had cleared, replaced by the vibrant gold of sun-drenched meadows and the sound of children playing in the village below. The stranger Elena had married was no longer a mystery, and the disgraced girl she had once been was a legend. Elena stood in the center of the estate's grand greenhouse, her hands covered in rich, dark soil. She wasn't wearing silk or rubies today. She wore a simple linen tunic, her hair tied back with a ribbon Stefan had given her. Around her, the blighted crops of the Highlands were blooming with a resilience that mirrored her own. Her work as a healer had expanded into a regional academy, where those without destined matches were taught that their value was found in their hands and their hearts, not their bloodlines. The Silver Moon Council sent another envoy this morning. A voice rumbled from the doorway. Elena looked up to see Stefan leaning against the glass frame. He looked younger, the deep lines of stress and secrecy that had once etched his face replaced by a steady, peaceful contentment. He walked over, ignoring the dirt on her hands, and pulled her into a warm embrace. "And what did they want this time?" Elena asked with a smile. "They are begging for the cure you developed for the blight," Stefan said, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "It seems that without the Martin family's wealth and Tyler's leadership, the territory is struggling. They're offering a formal apology and a seat on the High Council for you." Elena leaned back, looking out at the thriving Highland Valley. "Tell them they can have the cure. I don't need their seat, and I certainly don't need an apology to know who I am. But tell them that any null or rejected mate in their territory is welcome here at Castle Robs. We have plenty of room for those the world thinks are second best. The resolution of the romantic subplot was as fulfilling as the political victory. Their marriage, which had begun as a cold, desperate bid for a fresh start, had become the beating heart of the Highlands. They didn't need a mate bond to define their connection. They had chosen each other every day through fire, betrayal, and doubt. Before we see the final beautiful moment of their journey, I have to ask you all. Have you ever felt like you were being overlooked or judged for something you couldn't control? If Elena's story inspired you to keep your head high, drop a heart in the comments. And if you want to see more stories where the underdog becomes the queen, make sure you're subscribed. We're building a community of story lovers right here, and you belong with us. As the sun began to set, casting long purple shadows over the peaks, Stefan led Elena to the edge of the terrace, the very spot where he had first told her he had been waiting for her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a new ring. It wasn't a family heirloom or a ducal seal. It was a simple band of Highland gold, engraved with a sprig of the winter rose. "For the woman who chose me when she had every reason to run," Stefan whispered, sliding it onto her finger. "Not as a duke, not as a mate, but as your husband." "And for the man who saw me when I was invisible," Elena replied, her voice thick with joy. The past no longer haunted them. Tyler and Lydia were distant memories, lost to the shadows of the outlands. The Silver Moon territory was a chapter they had both closed. As the stars began to poke through the twilight, the Duke and his Duchess looked out over their kingdom, a place where every soul was valued, every bond was earned, and every ending was just a new, beautiful beginning. The story was over, but their life was just beginning, and for the first time, the Highland wind carried nothing but the sound of peace.